Two kids were playing a game, completely unaware of the eerie figures flickering outside the sliding glass door. This was a world overrun by zombies, a post-apocalyptic nightmare that had lasted for 6 years. Remarkably, this brother and sister had managed to survive in their isolated villa all this time, something very few could pull off. The dangers they faced were far greater than anyone could imagine. One day, a couple drove up to the villa. Jim greeted them while holding a toy gun. The man immediately asked, "Where are your parents?" Jim stayed silent, but the man simply smiled and said, "See you next time." That night, Jim and his sister tightly locked all the doors and windows. Outside, a few zombies lingered, waiting for any chance to break in. By morning, they were still safe. Jim checked the bullets in the magazine. It turned out the toy gun wasn't so ordinary after all. As the siblings went outside to play as usual, the same pickup truck from the day before pulled up again. This time, the couple's attitude was much firmer. They repeated their question, "Where are your parents?" Jim lied, saying they had gone into town to gather supplies. But the adults weren't easily fooled. The woman smiled kindly, pointing out that the town was several hours away and promised they could protect Jim and his sister until their parents returned. Seeing the house stocked with supplies and even a working fridge, the couple quickly decided to stay. The man, Jack, said he would hide the car outside. It seemed they were running from someone and trying not to be caught. Late that night, Jim overheard the couple talking. They sounded pleased with the villa. For safety, he and his sister slipped into their safe room, the secret that had kept them alive all this time. By morning, Jack was already making breakfast, clearly acting like he owned the place. Jim kept a calm face, but then muttered something strange. "It will be over before you know it." When night fell, Jim suddenly asked, "Is it time?" His dog sniffed him, then gave a barely noticeable nod. Without hesitation, Jim scooped up his sister and locked her safely inside the safe room once again. Downstairs, the couple was still wrapped up in their own world, unaware that danger was near. The woman excused herself, saying she needed the bathroom. But when she glanced outside, she spotted several zombies crouching near the window. She quickly turned off the lights, hoping they wouldn't notice her. Suddenly, the door behind her swung open. Jack rushed over with his gun drawn, only to find his girlfriend lying on the floor covered in blood. That was the last anyone saw of the couple. Meanwhile, at that moment, a long-haired man trekked through the forest. He noticed several traps in the snow and traced them back to the villa. Suddenly, a little girl appeared in front of him. Before he could react, a sharp sting hit his neck. A tranquilizer dart. Of course, Jim had fired it. When the man finally woke up, Jim was waiting, gun in hand. After some questioning, the man revealed his name was Dan, a special forces soldier on a mission to find his wife up north. Unlike others, he didn't want their food or medicine, only his weapon back. Jim took the chance to make a deal. He wanted Dan's help to power the villa. Curious, Dan asked, "Where did your parents go?" This time, Jim told the truth. His father was a scientist who had been missing for a long time, and his mother was a security agent who had recently gone on a mission. She was supposed to return soon. Dan was stunned when he saw the treadmill powering the villa. He hadn't expected electricity to come from someone literally running. Suddenly, a zombie approached the window. Without hesitation, Dan grabbed a discus and charged outside, killing it. When he returned, covered in blood, Jim scolded him. "Why'd you kill it? The windows are made of bulletproof glass. No zombie can get inside." Despite the lecture, Dan felt sorry for the siblings and got on the treadmill, powering the house manually. By then, Jim had already left the villa. Every morning, he checked the traps around the area to keep the zombie horde at bay. Sure enough, another one had been caught. Meanwhile, after breakfast, Dan explored the villa. On Jim's mother's desk, he spotted a car key and rushed to the garage, only to find the car broken down. Then, a locked room in the corner caught his attention. Just as he was about to open it, Jim stopped him sharply. After spending more than a day together, the siblings trusted Dan enough not to retreat to the safe room at night. Yet strangely, Jim handcuffed himself before bed. At dawn, Dan woke to footsteps outside. It was Jim on patrol. At one of the traps, the zombie from the previous day was still stuck. As Jim considered what to do, Dan appeared and thought the zombie might be Jim's mother. He raised his weapon to put her out of her misery, but Jim stopped him at the last second. Frustrated, Dan stormed back into the villa and opened the storage room he wasn't allowed into before. Inside, he found a blanket on the floor and walls covered with terrifying scratch marks. It was clearly a place used to keep zombies locked up. Just then, the roar of an engine echoed outside. More survivors had arrived, circling the villa with guns drawn. Dan stayed still, unarmed. Jim, returning from patrol, watched from a distance. His little sister waved frantically from an upstairs window. Before the intruders could spot her, Dan appeared and pulled her away. Jim sighed in relief. After failing to get inside, the armed group eventually gave up and left. From that moment, Jim trusted Dan even more and returned his weapon. Dan felt it was time to leave, but he couldn't shake a strange reluctance. That night, he dreamt of his wife calling to him. When he woke, Dan made an important decision. He would take Jim and his sister with him to search for his wife. That way, he could pursue his mission while protecting the siblings. But Jim refused without hesitation. He was determined to stay behind and wait for his mother's return. Just then, loud noises erupted outside. The gang of robbers had returned with reinforcements. And worse, they had taken Jim's little sister while she was playing outside. As tensions escalated and both sides faced off, sudden gunfire rang out. Two of the robbers dropped instantly. Dan rushed forward and managed to rescue the girl. The person behind the shots was none other than Jim's mother. But in the chaos, Dan was struck in the chest by a bullet from one of the attackers. He collapsed, powerless and unconscious. No one knew how long had passed before Dan finally woke up. To his shock, the gunshot wound on his chest had completely healed. Yet, he found himself tied to a post with a thick rope. Upstairs, Jim and his family waved at him continuously. Still confused, Dan made his way inside, where Melanie finally explained the truth. Ordinary infected people lose their brain function and are driven only by the urge to feed. But there was another type, special infected. Their brains stayed fully functional, like normal humans, but they also inherited the physical advantages of zombies, including the ability to heal from any wound or illness. The catch was that after sustaining serious injuries, or simply over time, they would enter a state of uncontrollable rage known as frenzy, where they became no different from regular zombies. After hearing this, Dan had an epiphany. Could he be one of those special infected? Melanie nodded. Otherwise, he would never have survived the gunshot. The fact that he only went through a brief frenzy and woke up unharmed was proof enough. Then came an even more shocking truth. Jim was also a special infected. The couple he killed that night had been victims of his uncontrollable frenzy. That explained why Jim always handcuffed himself before sleeping. That was also the reason for the claw-marked room Dan had discovered. It was where Jim stayed during his frenzies. Suddenly, the roar of an engine broke the night. Melanie, holding her daughter, faced a group of militia led by a white-bearded man she clearly knew. His daughter had run off with a shady man, and he had been searching for her ever since. Melanie assured him she would let him know if she found anything. Reluctantly, the old man left. That night, Dan asked about the villa's history. Melanie revealed that the National Security Agency had anticipated the zombie outbreak long ago. In remote locations like this one, they secretly built thousands of fortified shelters, each fully equipped with independent systems to survive without outside help. Hearing this, Dan felt regret. If only others had known earlier, many more lives could have been saved. But Melanie shook her head sadly. She revealed that both Jim and his sister were born with congenital heart conditions. Jim's father, a biologist, had been one of the first to study the virus. Knowing Jim wouldn't live past 3 years old, he injected him with the zombie virus in a desperate gamble, unintentionally turning him into a special infected. Tragically, during one of Jim's frenzies, his father was bitten and became a regular zombie. Melanie had no choice but to put him down herself. Dan couldn't help but admire her strength and determination. Over time, she and her family began to trust and rely on him. One day, the dog barked twice, the signal that Jim's frenzy was coming. He locked himself away, and soon agonizing screams echoed through the villa. Melanie's heart broke, but all she could do was wait by the door. Dan stepped in to take over the watch. But outside, tragedy struck. Jim's little sister suddenly collapsed from a heart attack. With limited medical resources, nothing could be done. Dan suggested infecting her like Jim, but Melanie refused. Jim's survival had been a miracle, one that couldn't be repeated. In the end, they let the girl pass away peacefully. When Jim emerged from his frenzy, the family gathered to say their final goodbyes. Dan knew it was time to leave. Despite Melanie and Jim's pleas, he set off on his journey to find his wife. With 2 family members gone, the villa felt colder than ever. Not far away, Whitebeard's men discovered the car Jack had once hidden. It was too perfect to be coincidence. The couple who once stayed there were exactly who Whitebeard had been looking for. His search soon led him straight back to Melanie's villa. Meanwhile, Dan, sleeping in the snow, woke to footsteps. He followed the trail back toward the villa and was gripped by unease. From a distance, he saw militia swarming the house. Whitebeard was inside, pressing Melanie for answers after his men found a small item belonging to his daughter. Melanie was cornered, unable to deny the truth. Dan quietly slipped past the guards and found Jim hiding in the kitchen. After learning how many enemies were inside, he pulled out his weapon. Like a shadow, he swiftly took down the militia one by one. But when he reached the main hall, Several guns pressed against his head. What he did next stunned everyone. Dan slashed his own neck with a knife. The room fell silent, but Melanie understood his intention. Taking the chance, she slipped away with Jim. Moments later, Dan fully gave in to his frenzy. Like an unstoppable force, he tore through Whitebeard and his men. This time, Melanie hadn't tied him up. She had no choice but to flee with her son. Dan's furious roars drew hordes of zombies, and by morning, the villa was in ruins. When Dan woke, the place was deserted. On the table lay a letter from Melanie. She and Jim had already gone north. Smiling faintly, Dan picked up Jim's favorite doll, slung it over his shoulder, and continued his journey northward, hoping that fate might let them meet again one day. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.